What kind of issues do media companies face today?
In the past couple of years, there's been an explosion of not only content, but also viewing platforms.
This used to be pretty simple to create content, send it out to a distributor, capture it, and show it to the customer. Now there are just so many sources of content.
Linear TV, the on-demand viewership,
Independent producers, user-generated content.
time-shifted, live someday, live +3, live +7.
All of that just over the last 5 years really has grown immensely.
Really hard to track how much content was viewed and by whom across what platform.
It just keeps getting more complex.
There has to be some type of standardization in the media industry so we could talk about the same movie, the same version of the same movie, and not mix up those metrics together.
You're starting to try to solve an end-by-end problem, and that's what that's kind of, I think, what brings us here.
Our rights management platform is tied in with the unique identifiers coming from EIDR.
EIDR is just an unbelievably great thing.
We could appropriately track where the content is going and how it's being consumed, and not mix up the SD version from the HD version, from the 3D version and the 4K version.
And so this is a standards-based identifier, alphanumeric, unique to a given asset. And so it can be a film, television program, series of television programs, any audiovisual asset.
You can tie it all back together from a reporting perspective, and that's where the value add is.
How you recognize that value in different contexts, how you measure where that content goes, how you negotiate the rights and the financials of that piece of content.
At any time and anywhere. All media companies face the same issue, being able to understand how their content is performing across platforms. With RSG's partnership in EIDR, we can not only track content across these platforms with a single ID versus multiple IDs, we could better understand how content is getting consumed. And that is the true value add of the RSG and EIDR partnership.
Hi guys, how are you? My name is Shiv, Sehgal, and I'm here to speak to you about, again, the same thing that everybody's dealing with, how to hunt for eyeballs in today's cross-platform world. And before you get to the hunting part where you can target the right content for the right viewer, the right advertising for the right viewer and the right platform, there's that little piece called tracking. And that's really the crux of the whole thing, to enable media and entertainment companies to get more competitive, to get more strategic, where you can start providing the right content for the right viewer at the right time. You first have to understand very simply, what are people watching? What are people watching live? What are people watching time shifted on demand? And what are their preferences? And that by itself has been a huge issue. We all have been talking about the same thing at all these trade shows for the past couple of years, cross-platform, reporting, IDs, standardization, and I'm here to talk a little bit about what are those drivers for it. So we've already been through this. I'm Shiv. And this is where things start to change. Ultimately, what has been driving the change in the industry, consumer behavior, and how people are viewing content. On the linear side, we're not watching in our couches in our living rooms anymore. There's been much more of a change in the way people are consuming content. And we're looking at last year's numbers, the total put levels, which is people watching TVs. You can see that there's been a decline, about 6% for people who are watching TV live in their living room. And where are they going? They're going to this new generation where you have the cord cutters. There's no need to get your cable subscription anymore. And folks like myself that are multitasking, we're watching TV, playing the guitar, the thing's on mute, we're watching Netflix, you have all these screens that are up and available, and getting all this information together in one common space where you can understand, this is how my content is performing live, this is how my content is being consumed on demand, and these are who your viewers are. And this is the issue that everyone is facing today. Where are your viewers, what are they consuming, and where are they watching it? And this requires some type of ultimately change, both from a business side and from a technical. And I just wanted to lay this out a little bit because our partnership with EIDR is really a partnership that everyone else is facing, the partnership between business and IT, and making sure that we could all speak the same language and enable this ability to speak the same language and to able to more accurately understand who your consumer is and what they're interested in. So the first impact on this new way of consuming content means, number one, there's more platforms. There's more programming that's being created for it, long form and short form. The short form clips are usually clips straight from that episode or highlights from a sports show. But now you have to have more of them to fuel that consumption that people are looking for. There's more versions as you create more platforms. The SD version, the HD version, the on-demand version, the director's cut, the broadcast version. You have to manage the different ways you slice and dice the content and make it available for these platforms to even play in the beginning. And we talked about earlier the diversification of assets. People have so many varied interests today, and to be able to support all those varied interests means not only more platforms, diversification of your inventory itself so you can better support those interests. And ultimately what that means, things get more complex. So let's drill down a little bit more. How's my content performing across linear, VOD, and digital platforms? This is a very basic question, but how do we answer this? Oh, let's go through all the questions. So not only how's our content performing across platform, what are people watching? What drove that viewership? How is our programming faring against competitors? And the last one, what are the devices people are watching? And by geo. So in order to answer these types of questions, the ability to do so requires both technical and business investment, because we need to start creating the platforms and standards to understand how is content being consumed across time-shifted content, live same day, live plus 3, live plus 7. And in order to do so requires a granularity in the data where you can make sure that you're tracking that time-shifted nature of content. Also, the reach, ranker, and ratings. These are the basic questions that the businesses are asking to say, how did I perform on linear? What were the ratings for your last time show? And when that episode of SpongeBob played at 4:30, how did it fare in the other day part when we ran it the past 20 previous times? What was the percentage gain or loss in performing that and airing that content in those different time slots? Again, that's still on the linear side, but now when you introduce the dynamic of on-demand, how was that content, that exact episode, how did it air? Linear, how did it fare across those 20 previous runs, and how many times did people watch it on Netflix, for example? Then you're starting to get a complete picture of, all right, this is how that actual series, SpongeBob, performs, and these are the people who are engaging with it. Maybe kids, when they come back from school, they watch SpongeBob at 3:30. That's why it drives a lot of viewership. But then it's the older generation that might be watching it more on Netflix, because that's something that they always watch. There's less of that fatigue, that burn rate where you see reality television once you watch it once. There's no need to watch it again, but I find myself watching Seinfeld, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air again and again and again, because there's more an affinity towards it. What videos are user engaging with? Well, it's actually very interesting that once you start to get answers to these questions, for example, the older generation, females and males 65 plus, are watching a lot of content on Facebook. Why? Maybe their grandkids are sharing it, but when you start to see your grandfathers and grandmothers engaging with shows like Ridiculousness, and they're watching, little clips of people getting hurt, you start to scratch your head to say, that's out of my target demographic. And you have to start understanding this full picture of your audience base and what is being consumed on linear and non-linear. Just to go through a couple more. When it comes to how's our programming faring against competitors, well, in today's day and age, there's a huge audience that you're supporting, and different areas have different interests, whether it's within the US, whether it's in Europe, and many times you start to see that different areas start to consume different content because it's more catered towards that area. You start to see, for example, certain smaller regions at a DMA level might be interested in different things, whether it's due to a local or national events that are happening in that area. Platforms and devices, this is important because you start to see certain things. For example, if you start to see people watching live TV on their device or different shows on the device, you want to know what else are they watching. If they're watching live TV and they're looking at other content that's related to the programming, that's key, because that means that people are engaged. And you start to see certain networks that start to provide commentary based off what they're watching. For example, The Walking Dead. There's The Talking Dead. That's all about commentary of that show. And if you know folks are engaging with that content while you're watching it live, well, that's a whole slew new series of content that you can put out just to engage with that user base, because you know that's something that they're looking at. And that's a huge monetizable opportunity. The popularity of your content across geographic location, we talked about this a little earlier with how it's faring against our competitors, but being able to score the what people are watching by region, by DMA, by provider, this is key to be able to understand, to make sure you get the right content at the right platform for the right viewer. Now, how do you do this? Well, we are looking for ultimately accuracy in data, because we want to be able to understand, again, how's content performing across time-shifted content across platforms. And you can't look at the numbers accurately without making sure you're talking about the same exact version of the same exact piece of content. And again, in the video we saw earlier, the SD version, the HD version. Let's take Wizard of Oz, for example. You have the HD version of Wizard of Oz. You have James Franco, the 2006 release year versus the 1956 version of Wizard of Oz. And if you want to understand how that James Franco Wizard of Oz is performing, you better not mix it up with the 1956 version, the SD version. And there's that, you have to speak apples to apples. And it all starts with accuracy and trust of your data. And you can't get anywhere beyond that simplest point if you don't have standards. And that's what we're here to talk a little bit about today. And before I give it off to my partner in crime, Don, this is what we're working towards, to be able to answer how is my content performing across platform, to be able to answer how is my exact version of that asset performing. And this is a little bit technical. We want to be able to show that we can speak the same language across all the various systems. Out of curiosity, how many business folks are here? We'll show of hands. All right. How many IT guys do we have? Technical folks? So we want to make sure ultimately that when we are speaking to the right systems, that we are actually giving you the buys for the James Franco HD or SD version, and not mixing it up with the 1956 SD version. And it's enabling standards like EIDR, for example, where you can start to get this information very easily by having a system that speaks to all the other systems the right way. And that's where EIDR comes into place. And with that said, give it off to Don.
Thanks, Shiv. Can you hear me okay? So I'm Don Dulchinos, that guy. And I want to talk about EIDR. And so I'm excited about two things today, this year at this show. We've been here. So EIDR itself is an ID. It's a standard format for an ID that relates to one particular record, entertainment record. It's also an organization that manages a registry of those IDs. And so it is a web service enabled ID. And then in Shiv's spaghetti diagram, you saw a link to that registry. So you can integrate through our APIs, through an SDK, into the registry and retrieve those IDs as needed for your purpose. So it's a big deal for me to be here for two reasons. One is it's the first time we've had an exhibit space at IBC. And I want to thank Shiv and Mukesh for sharing the RSG exhibit here in Hall 14. And I think RSG is really a kind of a prime example of why people are interested in EIDR. And I think Shiv covered that for us pretty well. The other thing that's exciting is we passed the 1 million ID mark in about a 4-year period, which is a big number to me. Might not be a big number to some of you in terms of what you manage, except that it's a fairly intently curated registry of these IDs. So accuracy is a big deal to us. You can't have those mistakes with a unique ID that Shiv was talking about that would introduce manual fixes and destroy your automation efficiency. And so we hit this 1 million mark, and we kind of timed it. So we had a major Hollywood release coming along, which is A Star is Born, which is a U.S. film classic that's being remade for the 3rd time. So I don't know how many film fans here are there here, but it was a Judy Garland version. There was a Barbra Streisand version. And so now the new one's coming out. Brad Cooper plays the declining star, on his way down. And the one this is a quiz. So who knows who the female lead is going to be? Lady Gaga. So we don't even have a release date yet, but he knows that. So, so that's our 1 million ID. And within that registry, there are original titles. There's a title level ID, but there can also be edits. There can be creative versions that get their own ID number, but are part of a schema that relate back to that parent ID. So you can do granular reporting, or you can do a roll-up of aggregate usage across all platforms. And that's one of the key value propositions. This is our growth this year. We have, at your leisure, you can look at all the logos of our member companies here. We have about 90 companies that are part of this organization. These are the ads this year, and all in green are European-based companies. And so it is a big deal to us that we expanded geographically, started as a US thing, but it's clearly now the global entity that it was meant to be. Vivendi just happens to have joined at a parent level. Showing their subsidiaries shows you the complexity of any media company these days. They're in a lot of businesses, online, broadcast, you name it. And all of those have different requirements and maybe different versions of the same asset. So again, the IDR registry is meant to be able to cover all of that. We have companies on the right side here. Excipio is from Germany. Sinfo is from Spain. Motion Picture Solutions is from the UK. International Copyright Exchange has 3 different rights organizations that are using IDR to track rights from Sweden, UK, and Germany. Ampere from the UK and Webedia from France. So we're starting to make our way into continental Europe, and we're very excited about that. One of our star member companies helped drive us to that 1 million mark was ITV. They joined last year, and for the last 6 months, they've been spending time moving their entire catalog to create IDRs where they didn't already exist, and have those all for their back catalog, and now have a system in place to create IDRs for new releases, for new acquisitions, because they acquire content, they commission content, and they require an ID be provided to them when that release is ready for broadcast. And then I think in a lot of ways, the key pieces in this in the middle block there, the distribution use cases, and that's where IDR efficiency is really important. There are now systems at ITV to share that data, the ID data, with the scheduling information, so it's in the EPG. It goes out to broadcast. It gets captured, bullet number 5 there, in the BARB rating system, and so BARB itself in the UK has a field for IDRs, and it can ingest those. And they do so because ITV wants that back in their reporting. And so when you get to sort of the far right here, let's get the reporting that's related exactly to the version of the content that went out through that system. And that's key use case. And then importantly, in sort of block 4 there is they are making that ID available to their distribution partners. So it's broadcast, cable, satellite, online, on-demand systems over the top. Those ID, again, the same ID from a parent level shows up there so that all that usage can be aggregated efficiently. This is a nice, simple chart. Just to call out the fact that we're now starting to see some of those distributors use IDR in their reporting. And so Rentrack and Nielsen are 2 reporting companies that are now reporting back to their clients who are on-demand providers the usage by IDR number. And so that's a consistency that they're getting across all of their content providers, which you see on the left-hand side here. And so it's critical that that asset get delivered with the IDR ID in it, and that all the information reporting back retains that ID going back. And so that system is in use, sort of the full cycle, life cycle of the asset. For those of you who are either studio representatives or part of broadcast creators, you have your internal systems. This is interesting. I always thought, I come out of a cable TV background, so I think about distribution a lot. In this case, Warner Brothers came back to me and said, we're not only using IDR in distribution, we're kind of getting our own house in order. And any company that's kind of large enough starts to acquire systems that grew up in silos from their different IT groups, and they don't talk to each other. Surprisingly, they're not using the same ID. They sometimes create their own ID just for that one kind of back and forth. So slowly but surely, our IDR representative at Warner Brothers, his title is Data Governance, and so he can actually impose on all these systems. This is our standard for communicating with each other, and so he's driving the IDR used through asset management systems, financial reporting systems, content ordering, and publishing, sort of his whole life cycle. And so we're seeing that increasingly. The one that's probably the busiest now and is starting to, from a distributor point of view, coming back to their content suppliers as a requirement is digital retail, online retail. And so you can see here Google, Netflix, Vudu, Amazon are all members of IDR. And these guys, I like to say, they don't have legacy systems. I'm like I said, an old cable guy. We had tons of legacy stuff that's 30 years old that hasn't been torn out yet. These guys are digital from the start, so it's a very efficient system. And anywhere there's not automation is a problem for them, and it's a problem for their content suppliers in terms of the time to market of getting that content on. So there's now a set of standards around the communication of avails of new content that's available. That's an EMA spec, Entertainment Merchants Association. It's called the EMA avail spec. And IDR is just basically a component of that message that goes out that here's what's available. And in the back and forth between the retailer and the content provider, there's any number of steps. I think there's something like 12 steps that we counted. We actually audited this, and we counted back and forth how many times information gets communicated back and forth about a single title. And any of those steps is an opportunity for a mistake to be made that you don't know. Is this the original? Is this a broadcast edit? Is this a territorial, geographic, language edit? The IDR ID helps them verify the quality of that and do it in an automated fashion. So what we've noticed is, and what we've measured, and this happens to be an example supplied to us from Google, the Google Play platform, is the amount of work they had to do around title matching, deduplicating what was going back and forth, figuring out the research associated with that piece of content, final updates, audits, the whole life cycle was roughly 50 man-hours of work that was happening pre-standards, all not so automated, down to basically a quarter of an hour, 15 minutes. For the same, and now you multiply that by how many thousands of titles, or in Google's case, maybe hundreds of thousands of titles, you see real cost savings there. And so this has become a benefit both to the retailer and to the content provider in terms of getting their stuff to market timely. I think that's where I'll stop, and maybe we will have a little chat